Throwaway account. Long post. Sorry if it's messy. I'm still processing this. At the time, I was 3 weeks into a training exercise, the kind where days blur together into dust, commands, aching muscles, and 4 hours of sleep if you're lucky. You stop thinking in calendar dates and start thinking in checklists. Hydrate. Don't screw up. Keep your people safe. Don't be weak. That was my world then. Predictable, brutal, honest. Which is why the phone vibration felt wrong. We weren't supposed to have our phones on us except during very specific windows. I was standing off to the side of the training ground, helmet under my arm, boots coated in dirt, when I felt it buzz against my thigh. Once. Short. Insistent. I knew before I even checked. My sister doesn't call unless something is wrong. I stepped behind a vehicle, shielded from shouting instructors and engine noise, and answered. She didn't say hi. She didn't ask how I was. Her voice was quiet, not crying, not shaking. Too controlled. That was the first red flag. He filed a lawsuit, she said. I remember looking at the ground while she spoke, like the dirt might explain it. Who? I asked, even though I already knew. Dad. That word hit harder than any drill ever had. She paused, then added, he wants to take the house. Not a house. The house. The one our grandfather left to us after he died. Registered in our names. Signed, sealed, boringly legal. The house where we grew up. Where our grandfather taught us how to fix a fence. Where he sat on the porch every evening. Where every door frame still has pencil marks showing how tall we were at different ages. The house our father never cared about until it became something he could take. My sister kept talking, explaining dates, papers, threats he'd been making quietly for months. How he'd suddenly started showing up, acting polite, asking questions. How neighbors were already gossiping. How he kept saying things like, they're children. They don't understand responsibility. Children. I was standing there in full gear, bruised, exhausted, responsible for people's lives. And somewhere back home, my own father had decided I was still a convenient idiot. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't swear. I didn't feel dramatic anger yet. What I felt was colder. The kind of calm that only comes when you realize someone has underestimated you so badly that they've already lost. They just don't know it yet. I told my sister one thing before hanging up. Don't respond to him. Don't sign anything. Scan everything. Then the instructor shouted my name. I put the phone away, picked up my helmet, and went back into formation like nothing had happened. But something had shifted. He thought I was far away. He thought the uniform meant I was disconnected. He thought service made me weak in other areas. That was his first mistake. Here's the thing about my father. He has always mistaken silence for stupidity. Growing up, that worked for him. If you don't argue, he assumes you don't understand. If you don't interrupt, he assumes you agree. If you leave the room, he assumes you've given up. He's built his entire personality around being the loudest adult in the room and calling it authority. So when he filed the lawsuit, he did it calmly, casually, like someone who already knew the ending. My sister told me later how confident he sounded on the phone with lawyers. No yelling, no rage, just that smug, slow certainty. The kind of tone people use when they think they're educating a child. He had his reasons, apparently. First, I was away on duty. He knew that. He counted on it. Training exercises, restricted leave, distance. In his mind, I was unreachable, unavailable, irrelevant. A name on paper, not a person who could show up. Second, I was just a soldier. Not a lawyer, not a business person, not someone who understood documents. He actually said that out loud to my sister. Told her I was good at orders, not thinking. That service teaches obedience, not strategy. That one almost made me laugh when she told me. Third, he had spent years convincing himself that I was still convenient, quiet, busy, always gone, always tired. someone he could step over without resistance, someone who wouldn't make a scene. He underestimated the way service changes you. Service doesn't make you loud. It doesn't make you impulsive. It teaches you to wait, to observe, to prepare quietly and act decisively. While he was telling neighbors that his daughters were confused and incapable, while he was reassuring himself that the case was already won, I was still running drills, still sleeping on the ground, still being underestimated by people who had no idea what I was capable of. He thought confidence was power. What he didn't realize was that his confidence was built entirely on one fragile assumption: that I wouldn't come home. I didn't see the house while all this was happening. That might sound strange, but in a way, it made everything clearer. When you're deployed or stuck in long training cycles, places stop being physical. They turn into ideas, anchors, symbols you carry with you when everything else is temporary. For me, that house wasn't walls or a roof. It was proof that at least one thing in my life had been built with intention and care, not control. To my father, it was something else entirely. Once the lawsuit was filed, he stopped pretending. According to my sister, it was like a switch flipped. He started showing up more often, standing in front of the house longer than necessary, talking loudly with neighbors. He told different versions of the same story, depending on who was listening. To one neighbor, "They're too young. They don't know what maintenance costs." To another, "I built most of this place myself." To a third, "I'm just protecting family property." None of that was true. Not even close. Our grandfather had built that house with his own hands, literally. There were photos of him pouring concrete, lifting beams, measuring everything twice because he didn't trust shortcuts. My father had been there sometimes, sure, mostly to criticize, rarely to help. But when the will was signed years later, the decision was clear. The house went to us. Not emotionally, legally, clean and simple. That's why this wasn't really about inheritance. It was about ownership. My father has always needed to own things: conversations, decisions, narratives, people. If something existed outside his control, it bothered him. If someone proved they didn't need him, it enraged him. And the house? The house was physical evidence that someone else, my grandfather, had chosen us over him. So he reframed it. He called it a burden. He called us incapable. He called himself responsible. And suddenly, the house wasn't a home anymore. It was a trophy he wanted to reclaim, proof that he was still the authority, that no matter how far I went, no matter what uniform I wore, no matter how independent my sister became, he could still take something from us. What hurt the most wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was how familiar it felt. This wasn't the first time he'd dismissed us as incapable. Growing up, any independence was met with mockery. Any plan we had was naive. Any success was luck. And any silence from us was interpreted as permission. He had spent years training himself to believe we wouldn't fight back. While I was still sleeping on a folding cot and waking up before dawn, my sister was living inside that pressure every day. She told me about the subtle humiliations, how he'd drop by unannounced, how he'd comment on the state of the house, how he'd say things like, "You girls really need help," loud enough for others to hear. Not threats, just erosion. That's how he always worked. He didn't kick doors down. He leaned on them until they cracked. But here's the thing he didn't understand. In service, you learn to recognize targets. And once you see one clearly, emotion stops clouding the process. To him, the house was a prize. To me, it had become something else entirely, a line, and he had just stepped over it. People expect anger to be loud. They imagine screaming phone calls, threats, dramatic ultimatums. That's how my father operated. So that's what he expected from us too. Some emotional reaction he could point at and say, "See? They're unstable. They can't handle this." He never got it. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. I didn't even let myself think about what I'd say if I saw his face. Instead, I prepared. Every evening after training, when others collapsed onto their bunks, I sat under a dim light with my phone and a notebook. My sister and I developed a routine without ever saying it out loud. She scanned. I verified. She photographed old folders. I cross-checked dates. She labeled files. I built timelines, powers of attorney, registration certificates, the will, old tax records, utility bills with our names on them, even handwritten notes from my grandfather that referenced the girl's house, in that casual way people do when ownership is already settled in their minds. Piece by piece, the picture became airtight. What my father didn't understand, what men like him never understand, is that service doesn't strip you of intelligence. It sharpens it. You learn how to process chaos, how to break complex situations into manageable elements, how to document everything because memory alone gets people killed. Paperwork is just another battlefield. He assumed I was too tired to think, too far away to act, too obedient to resist. Meanwhile, I was running drills all day and running legal scenarios all night. There were moments when exhaustion hit so hard my hands shook while holding the phone. Moments when I wanted to sleep and forget everything. Moments when the humiliation caught up to me. The realization that my own father thought so little of me that he believed I wouldn't even try to defend myself. That part hurt more than I expected. But pain has a way of sharpening focus. My sister told me about his latest moves in short, factual updates. How he'd spoken to a lawyer friend. How he'd told her it would be easier if she just cooperated. How he'd said, "Your sister won't understand what's happening anyway." Every time she repeated one of his lines, I wrote it down. Dates, phrases, witnesses. He thought humiliation was about volume, about dominance, about saying the right thing in front of the right people. He never noticed what he was giving us in the process. Evidence. I requested leave quietly. Proper channels, no drama, no explanations beyond what was required. When approval came through, I didn't celebrate. I just adjusted the plan. Uniform ready, documents organized, copies made, originals protected. He still thought this was happening to us. What he didn't see was that, somewhere between scanned pages and sleepless nights, the dynamic had already shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was setting the conditions. And when you do that long enough, the confrontation stops being emotional. It becomes inevitable. The hearing date was set quietly. No dramatic summons, no cinematic buildup. Just a line of text in an official notice my sister forwarded to me at 02:14 a.m., followed by a single message from her. "He's very confident." I read it while sitting on the edge of my bunk, boots still on, body sore in that deep, familiar way that comes after weeks of routine exhaustion. Around me, others were asleep or pretending to be. The air smelled like dust and metal and something burnt. Normal. I didn't feel panic. That surprised me. Instead, I felt the same calm I get before inspections or operations. The kind where everything that could be done has been done. And now all that's left is execution. I arrived home at night. No one knew. Not neighbors, not relatives, not him. I took a bus, then another, then walked the last stretch because I needed the time to think. The city looked smaller than I remembered, quieter. Or maybe I had just grown used to places where silence meant danger instead of peace. At the apartment where I stayed for the night, I laid everything out on the table with military precision. Originals, copies, backup copies, a clean folder for the court, another one just in case. I checked dates again, names, stamps, signatures. At some point, I caught my reflection in the window. Uniform pressed, hair pulled back, face thinner than before, eyes different, harder, quieter. I remembered how my father used to look at me before service, like I was unfinished, temporary, something he could always reshape later. He hadn't seen this version of me yet. That morning, I didn't rush. I polished my boots carefully. Not for appearance, for ritual. I pinned my medals on slowly, deliberately, not to intimidate anyone, but because I had earned them, and I refused to hide that fact for someone else's comfort. Outside, the air was cold, sharp. It woke me up better than coffee ever could. When I reached the courthouse, I noticed small things immediately. The way conversations dipped when I walked past. The way a security guard straightened his back without thinking. The way a clerk looked up, opened her mouth to speak casually, then stopped and switched to a formal tone. I didn't enjoy it, but I noted it. Inside, my sister was already there. She looked smaller than she should have, wrapped in a coat that was too thin for the weather. When she saw me, she froze for a second, like she wasn't sure if I was really standing there. Then she exhaled. Not a happy sound, a relieved one. "I didn't think you'd make it," she whispered. "I told you not to worry," I said, and meant it. My father arrived 10 minutes later. He walked in smiling. That's what still stands out to me. The smile, relaxed, confident. The smile of a man who believes the outcome has already been decided. He was talking to his lawyer, laughing softly, gesturing like this was an inconvenience, not a confrontation. Then he saw me. The smile didn't disappear immediately. It stalled, hung there for half a second too long, like his face hadn't caught up with his brain yet. His eyes dropped to the uniform, the insignia, the posture. For the first time since this began, he hesitated. He didn't say my name, didn't approach, didn't even nod. He just looked away. In that moment, I understood something important. He had never imagined this version of me sitting across from him. Not prepared, not calm, not present. The hearing hadn't even started yet. And already, the story he'd built in his head was falling apart. Courtrooms have their own atmosphere. If you've never been in one during something that actually matters to you, it's hard to explain. It's quiet, but not peaceful. The silence feels thick, like everyone is holding their breath at the same time. Papers rustle too loudly. Footsteps echo longer than they should. When the doors opened and we were called in, my father walked first. Of course he did. He always walks first. Always assumes the space will rearrange itself around him. He chose a seat without hesitation, leaning back slightly, one arm draped over the chair like this was a meeting he was running. His lawyer murmured something to him, and he nodded without really listening. I followed with my sister. The moment I crossed the threshold in uniform, the room changed. Not dramatically, not like in movies. It was subtler than that, which made it more real. Conversations stopped halfway through sentences. Someone coughed and then immediately straightened up. A woman in the second row lowered her phone slowly, eyes flicking back to me, then away. I felt my sister tense beside me. I kept my pace even. Then the judge entered. Everyone stood, including me, including my sister, including the lawyers. Everyone, except my father. He was still looking through a folder, distracted, confident, convinced this was routine. It took him a second too long to realize the room had risen without him. When he finally looked up, he froze, half standing, half sitting, caught in that awkward moment where you realize you've misjudged the situation. The judge's eyes moved to him. Not angry, not loud, just waiting. My father stood up abruptly, face flushing, movements clumsy. He avoided looking in my direction as he did it, focusing instead on straightening his jacket like that could undo what had just happened. We sat when instructed. I noticed his hands now. He kept clasping and unclasping them. A small thing. But my father never fidgets. He's always prided himself on being in control. Control was slipping. The judge glanced at the case file, then at me. Not with curiosity, with recognition of status. That's something people don't talk about much. The way institutions react to uniforms. It's not worship. It's acknowledgement. It's the understanding that you represent structure, responsibility, something bigger than yourself. The judge nodded once. Not to intimidate anyone, not to flatter me, just protocol. My father saw it. I didn't look at him, but I felt it. That shift where a man realizes the room is no longer tilted in his favor. Where the authority he assumed was automatic suddenly feels conditional. Proceedings began. My father's lawyer spoke first, polished, confident, carefully dismissive. He used phrases like youthful inexperience and family misunderstanding. He framed the lawsuit as concern, responsibility, protection. Every word was designed to make us sound incapable without sounding cruel. My father watched the judge closely, nodding at the right moments, performing agreement like a man who's done this before. Then his gaze flicked to me. Just once. Quick. Assessing. Like he was trying to reconcile two images in his head. The daughter he'd dismissed for years, and the woman sitting across from him now, spine straight, hands steady, eyes clear. I met his eyes for the first time since entering the room. I didn't glare. I didn't smile. I didn't challenge him. I simply existed. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever could. When the judge asked if the defendants were present and prepared to respond, my sister inhaled sharply. I felt it, even before she spoke. "I am," I said calmly. My voice didn't echo. It didn't shake. It carried. The judge nodded again and gestured for me to stand when ready. As I rose, I saw it out of the corner of my eye. My father, leaning forward now, elbows on knees, suddenly invested, suddenly alert. For the first time since this started, he wasn't confident. He was listening. And that, more than anything else, told me how badly he had miscalculated. My father cleared his throat before speaking, like he was preparing for a performance he'd rehearsed in his head 100 times. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket again, a nervous habit now, and addressed the court with the same voice he used my entire childhood. Calm, reasonable, slightly condescending, wrapped in concern. He talked about family first. Of course he did. He said he was a worried parent. He said he was only trying to help. He said the house was too much responsibility for young women without life experience. Young women. I was standing there in uniform, with service records older than some of his arguments, and he still chose that phrasing. He spoke about my grandfather next. Carefully, respectfully on the surface. He implied that age had made him sentimental, that he'd been influenced, that his decision hadn't been entirely rational. He didn't say manipulation outright. He didn't need to. He let the implication hang in the air like smoke. Then he talked about me, not directly, never directly. He referred to me as the daughter currently serving, as if distance erased identity, as if being away meant being absent in every possible sense. He mentioned my service with a tone that suggested inconvenience, not sacrifice. "She's dedicated," he said, nodding slightly. "But dedication doesn't equal understanding. Military life is structured, simplistic. Simplistic." That word landed harder than I expected. He went on, explaining how I'd always struggled with details, how I'd never been interested in paperwork, how I'd preferred physical challenges over intellectual ones. He smiled gently as he said it, like he was doing me a favor by lowering expectations publicly. I realized then that this wasn't just about the house. This was about humiliation. This was him trying to reclaim narrative control in front of an audience, to reduce me back to something manageable, to make the judge see me the way he always had, useful, obedient, but fundamentally incapable of independent thought. The worst part? Some people in the room nodded along at first, not because they agreed, but because his tone was familiar. Because society is comfortable with fathers who know better. Because a calm voice is often mistaken for truth. I stood there, hands at my sides, listening to my own life being summarized incorrectly. I felt my sister tense beside me, anger radiating off her in quiet waves. I felt the urge to interrupt, to correct him point by point. But service teaches you something important. You don't interrupt your opponent when they're exposing themselves. My father kept talking. He said the lawsuit wasn't aggressive, it was preventive. He said he feared we'd lose the property through negligence. He said he was prepared to manage it responsibly until we were ready. Ready. As if readiness was something he alone could define. Then he turned slightly, gesturing toward me without looking directly at me, and delivered the line that made the room finally shift. "With all due respect," he said, "my daughter follows orders. She doesn't question them. That's how she's been trained." Silence followed. Not the polite kind, the uncomfortable kind. Even his lawyer stiffened, because that wasn't just dismissive, it was ignorant. And in a courtroom, ignorance has weight. I watched the judge's pen pause. I watched his confidence crack in real time. For the first time, my father realized he might have said too much, that his version of authority didn't translate well outside his own living room, that the traits he'd mocked for years, discipline, restraint, precision, were the same ones the court valued. He finished speaking shortly after that, his voice losing momentum, his sentences tightening. When he sat down, he didn't lean back this time. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped, waiting. That was when I understood something with absolute clarity. He hadn't come here to win legally. He'd come here to reassert dominance, and he had just handed me the space to dismantle that illusion completely. When the judge looked up and said, "You may respond," I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt ready. When the judge told me I could speak, I didn't rush to stand. That pause mattered. It gave the room time to reset. It gave my father time to sit with what he'd just said. And it gave me one last moment to feel everything. The insult, the history, the years of being talked about instead of listened to. And then set it aside. I stood calmly. No dramatic movements, no visible tension, just straight posture and stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people pay attention because they can't read it. "I'll be brief," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar to my own ears. Lower than it used to be. Steadier. The result of years of giving reports where clarity mattered more than emotion. I didn't start with my father. I started with facts. I stated the registration number of the property, the date it was transferred, the notary's name, the exact wording of my grandfather's will. I referenced document numbers, attachments, page counts. I spoke the language of systems, the kind that doesn't care who you are, only what you can prove. I watched the judge follow along, pen moving again. Then I addressed the timing. I explained that the lawsuit had been filed while I was on active duty, during a period when my presence was limited by service obligations. I didn't accuse. I didn't speculate. I simply stated the sequence of events. Dates don't argue. They just exist. I acknowledged my service next, not defensively, not proudly, just accurately. I explained that service requires constant documentation, legal literacy, and personal accountability. That mistakes in paperwork have consequences, sometimes fatal ones. That understanding systems is not optional where I come from. I didn't look at my father while I said that. I didn't need to. Then I turned to the accusation he'd made. The one about obedience. "I don't follow orders blindly," I said evenly. "I follow lawful orders after assessment. That distinction is fundamental." The room shifted, not loudly, but I felt it, the way attention sharpened, the way a few people adjusted in their seats. The judge looked up fully now. I explained that my sister and I had maintained the property, paid taxes, handled utilities, and preserved records. I submitted the folders, originals first, copies second, labeled, indexed. When the clerk accepted them, her hands lingered on the folder for half a second longer than necessary. I finally looked at my father then, not with anger, with clarity. "I have no intention of relinquishing property that was legally entrusted to us," I said, "and I do not consent to having my absence used as leverage against my family." My father's face had changed completely by then. The confidence was gone. The condescension had collapsed inward, turning into something tight and defensive. His eyes moved too fast now, from me to the judge, to the documents, back to me. Like he was searching for a version of reality where this still went his way. I finished without flourish. No further statements. I sat down. The silence afterward was heavier than before, not awkward, not tense, final. The judge took his time reviewing the documents. Pages turned slowly, deliberately. Each sound felt amplified. My sister's breathing steadied beside me. My father didn't move at all now. For the first time in my life, he wasn't controlling the room. He was waiting to be judged. Waiting is its own kind of test. In service, waiting usually means something is about to happen. An order, a signal, movement. Your body stays ready even when nothing moves. This was different. This was stillness without a countdown. The judge read in silence, not skimming, not rushing, actually reading, page by page, stamp by stamp, signature by signature. Every few seconds, his pen paused, then underlined something. Once, he adjusted his glasses and went back to a previous page, comparing dates. Another time, he glanced at the clerk and quietly asked for a document to be brought closer. No one spoke. My sister's hands were clasped so tightly I could see the tension in her fingers. I didn't touch her, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew she needed to feel that she was standing on her own now too. That this wasn't me rescuing her. This was us defending ourselves. Across from us, my father sat completely still, not leaning back anymore, not confident, not relaxed. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, psychologically, like someone whose script had been taken away mid-performance. His lawyer whispered something to him at one point, probably reassurance, probably damage control. My father didn't respond. He just nodded once, eyes fixed on the desk. That was when it hit me how much of his power had always been imaginary. It relied on us believing in it. The judge finally set the documents down. The sound echoed louder than it should have. He looked at my father first. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't sympathetic either. It was neutral in the way only institutions can be neutral, impersonal, unmoved by ego or family roles. He summarized the facts out loud. The property was legally transferred. The will was valid. The registration was clear. There was no evidence of incapacity, coercion, or negligence. Each sentence stripped another layer off my father's narrative. Then the judge addressed the timing of the claim. He noted that filing while one of the owners was on active duty raised questions, not accusations, but concerns. He spoke about responsibility, about respect for service obligations, about the importance of not exploiting absence. I saw my father's jaw tighten. Finally, the judge looked at my sister and me together. Ownership, he said, does not require permission from a parent once the law has spoken. Then he delivered the decision. Brief, direct, final. The claim was dismissed in full. No delays, no reconsideration, no conditions. The house remained with its lawful owners. For a second, no one reacted. Then my sister exhaled, a sound that was half breath, half release. I felt my shoulders drop slightly, tension I hadn't realized I was still carrying finally letting go. My father didn't move. He didn't protest. He didn't argue. He didn't even look at us. He just stared straight ahead, as if the words hadn't quite reached him yet. When the judge stood, everyone followed. This time, my father stood immediately, too quickly, like someone trying to prove he still knew the rules. But something fundamental had changed. As we gathered our documents, the clerk gave us a small nod. Not official, not dramatic, human. The kind that says, "You handled that well." My father stood up last. He didn't come over. He didn't speak. He didn't even say my name. He walked past us without looking, shoulders stiff, steps fast. His lawyer followed, murmuring something urgent that went unanswered. Watching him leave, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not revenge, relief. Because the humiliation he'd tried to inflict hadn't landed on us. It had rebounded. And for the first time, he was the one walking out of a room smaller than when he entered. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter, colder, real. I took off my cap as soon as we crossed the steps. Not out of disrespect, out of release, like setting something heavy down after carrying it longer than you realized. My sister stood beside me, silent, eyes fixed on the street like she was afraid the ground might shift again if she looked away. Neither of us spoke at first. We didn't need to. People think the moment after victory is loud, that you cry, laugh, say something sharp or meaningful. But most of the time, it's quiet. The adrenaline drains and leaves behind something raw and unfamiliar. Relief can feel like exhaustion. My father exited the building a few minutes later. I noticed because my sister stiffened instantly. Years of conditioning don't disappear in one ruling. I stayed where I was, not blocking his path, not stepping forward. He stopped when he saw us, just for a second. Up close, he looked older than I remembered. The confidence that used to fill his posture had collapsed inward. His eyes flicked over my uniform again, slower this time, like he was seeing it properly for the first time. Not as a costume, not as rebellion, as reality. "You didn't have to do this," he said finally. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I was wrong." Just that. I kept my voice even. "You didn't have to file the lawsuit." He looked away, toward the street, toward nothing. "I was trying to help," he muttered. That old line, one last attempt to save face. I didn't argue. "I'm going back to duty tomorrow," I said. "The house will stay quiet. There won't be problems unless you bring them." That was it. No threat, no invitation. He nodded once, stiffly, and walked away. Watching him go, I realized something important. I didn't need him to understand. I just needed him to stop. My sister leaned against me after he disappeared down the street. Not dramatically, just enough to borrow strength for a moment. "I didn't think anyone would take us seriously," she admitted. "I thought, because he's our father." "I know," I said. That belief, that parents automatically outrank their children forever, is powerful and dangerous. We went back to the house that evening. The same house, same walls, same creaking floorboards. But it felt different now. Safer. Like it finally belonged to the people living in it, not the ones trying to control it. I slept that night without checking my phone every hour. The next morning, I packed my bag and put the uniform back on. Not because of the case, because that's who I am. And somewhere between the courthouse steps and the front door of that house, I understood something clearly. Service didn't make me weaker in the world outside. It taught me how to stand my ground in it. I'm back on duty now. Different location, different routine, same early mornings and controlled chaos. If you saw me in passing, you'd never know any of this happened. That's how it usually goes. Life doesn't pause to acknowledge your private wars. But this one changed me. Not in a dramatic way, in a precise way. For a long time, I thought humiliation only came from strangers, from people who didn't know you, didn't respect you, didn't see your value. I was wrong. The most effective attempts at humiliation come from people who know exactly where you're vulnerable. People who helped build the version of you they now try to diminish. My father didn't just try to take a house. He tried to take the story of who I was. He counted on my absence. He counted on my silence. He counted on the uniform making me less human, less capable, less relevant. What he didn't count on was what service actually teaches. It teaches you that authority without accountability is meaningless. That documentation beats volume. That patience isn't weakness, it's preparation. There were moments when I wanted revenge. Real revenge. Not legal, not clean. just emotional payback for years of being underestimated. But I didn't need it. Watching his confidence collapse under its own assumptions was enough. The humiliation he planned never landed on me. It landed on him. If there's anything I'd tell someone reading this, especially if you're in service, or just away from home, or constantly being told you don't understand, it's this. Don't confuse distance with powerlessness. Don't confuse calm with consent. And don't let anyone use your silence as proof of your weakness. You don't owe people access just because they share your blood. You don't owe explanations to those who've already decided who you are. Prepare quietly. Document everything. Show up when it matters. And when they finally realize who they're dealing with, let the facts speak. They always do.